As you use Excel, situations invariably arise when you need to look up data, sometimes from information found on the current worksheet, sometimes on a different worksheet in the same workbook, and sometimes even from another workbook. There's a category of functions in Excel referred to as lookup functions. And the more common ones are HLOOKUP for horizontal, and even more common, VLOOKUP, V for vertical. As we look at the information on this worksheet here, you could imagine in column G, we might want to calculate a tax rate. Now, if you've mastered the if function and you've worked with it heavily, this might be your starting point. For example, you're looking at a salary here, the very first person, of $41,639. Now, the yellow table to the right actually has information in it that is going to give us the answer. And most people, even if they're not familiar with Excel, if they happen to see that table, would understand it in the following way. They're looking at the value 41,600, and looking in the table, they'd realize that if someone has a salary of 45,000, the tax rate would be 7%. But this person's salary hasn't reached that level yet, so most people would understand this and read this as 6%. If that table were smaller, and the breakpoints were, say, every 20,000 or something like that, and we had only 5 or 6 answers, you could imagine tackling this with an if function. And it would work. It would be cumbersome, it would be long, but many kinds of tables, like the one we're seeing here, might contain, for example, 11 answers. That would mean 10 nested ifs. Now, you can do that in the new version of Excel, but that's really not the best way to get here. And so in considering how you structure a table, the table we see here that I'm highlighting in columns I and J is structured vertically. The key information that we were looking up and trying to compare with is in column I in the example here. Now you'll notice here to the right is another table containing exactly the same information, but it's structured differently. It's laid out in a horizontal way. I think most people looking at the layout of these two tables would say, well, the table on the left, the vertically oriented table, is a lot more, not only coherent maybe, but it takes up a lot less space on the Excel screen. It's just the nature of Excel for information to be structured more easily. It's more readable when you have what we see in columns I and J as opposed to the other table. So, based on the information that you have from the real world that you're trying to put into Excel, more likely than not, you're going to be creating tables that are vertically oriented. Now, obviously, there will be other times when the information just looks better if it's horizontal. And furthermore, you may already have a worksheet with a table in it. Maybe you inherited it from someone else, or you wrote it a while ago. It's already got formulas in it working off of a horizontal table. Of course, you don't want to have to redesign that. Now, don't think from the idea that what you're seeing here that tables only have 2 columns or 2 rows. Sometimes tables are quite extensive and contain many columns and rows. And off to the right here is an example too, where we see a table. And neither of these, of course, is like a real tax structure. Sometimes we wish it might be, but here's a much larger table where answers are based not only on someone's salary, but also the number of dependents. So tables sometimes are quite large. And this table, of course, here has many potential results. So the discussion about lookup functions invariably begins with what kind of a table are you going to be using? A vertically structured table, which is most common, or a horizontal table. And must it be on the same worksheet? No. Although I would recommend that if you're setting up the data and testing out various lookup functions, it sure is handy to have the table information nearby. Later you could move it. It also might be easier and more proficient to give the table a name, a range name. That's going to make formulas and functions easier to read. And so the whole discussion of tables involves where are you going to put the information and how are you going to structure it. You'll notice both of these examples here too, and they're identical in content, that table information is in ascending order in the left column. Now we are going to be showing you how sometimes when you use lookups, you're looking for exact matches. That's not the case here. No one of these salaries happens to match this. Now, certainly one of them might or could. We're not saying that. But you certainly wouldn't want to have a table with every possible salary listed here. That would be ridiculous. But anytime you're trying to match up information from a table and you don't have exact entries, and we're usually talking about numbers that are computational in nature, these must be in ascending order as we read downward, and in horizontal tables, the information must be in ascending order as we read rightward. And that's only in the example of VLOOKUP, which will be saying the left column, or in HLOOKUP, the top row. The other columns here and the other rows here are not necessarily in ascending order. The other kind of match involves, and usually it's text, but not always, any order you want, but sometimes you'll be using lookups for exact matches. So that's the general idea behind lookup tables. Again, when you're setting them up, it's a good idea to put them on the same worksheet where you're writing formulas so you can test them more easily and quickly, and then you'll decide, based on who might be using them, as to whether they should stay on that worksheet or possibly you'll put them on another worksheet. But all formulas that you've written relating to tables will translate properly, even if you move the tables to different sheets or even to different workbooks.